Well, it's an honor to be here with you guys to share a little bit about what God has been doing in Greece. Our talk is a little bit about Southern Europe. I realize most of you, if not all of you, are not from Southern Europe. And so I want to share what God's doing in a way that maybe you can capture the essence of what's possible. You can also imagine what God can do in your context. So we're not going to I'm not going to give any step-by-step instructions, but I really want to share with you God's story and the things that He's been doing in my heart. So I've been living in Athens, Greece for about 10 years now. I'll take the privilege of showing you a picture of my family. This is my wife, Joy, my 3 kids, Nora, Everly, and Abraham. They're 18, 15, and 12. They're an important part of what I do, an important part of my story there in Greece as well. But when I think about Southern Europe, I want to ask this question. What is God doing? So, I can share with you some of the things that God's been up to, some of the things that, I have a front row seat to in Athens, planting an intercultural church. But I think that is actually the primary question that I want each of you to wrestle with and be thinking about. And I heard Alex mention it as well. And I think that's where we start. What is God doing? Alex said he went out and walked around. He just wanted to see what is happening. And in each of your spaces, God's doing something. You can be sure of it. And so the first question, what is God doing? It's a dangerous question, to be honest, because if you're asking that question with faith, you may find yourself pulled in by God's providence to be a part of what He's doing. And that's one of the things that we're talking about here as well. So let me just answer that question, particularly about Greece. I can't speak for all of Southern Europe, although I know some stories. But we're going to talk a little bit about what God's doing in Greece. So the gospel is moving through Greece. I saw the numbers Taya was throwing up about the number of evangelicals in all these countries, whatever it was, 5 million, 40,000, 400,000. Large numbers for me, because in Greece there's just 30,000 evangelicals. And it's an Orthodox culture, so it has the kind of the label of Christian, but very few followers of Jesus. In fact, it's just 0.3% evangelical. So when you think about planting churches, making disciples, you can put a church anywhere you want, and you're not on anyone else's footprint. You're not on top of anyone. It's wide open, and I think that's an exciting place to be. There are no seminaries in Greece. This is a challenge for us. When we think about training leaders, we have to send all of our leaders overseas to study and come back. Of course, they go out and they come back changed in some ways. They come back, if they come back at all sometimes. So that's a challenge for us. Like, how do we develop leaders? And the old church model of sending someone to seminary and bringing them back and giving them a church is not sustainable. It's a very expensive process. And so I think that what we're on to here, thinking about making disciples, simplifies those processes for us. So I'm excited about that for Greece especially. And even some of our existing churches don't even have pastors, so we don't even have enough pastors for the churches we have, let alone thinking about expanding. So on a personal level, I am planting an intercultural church, which I've been at work at for about 5 years. So lesson number 1, which we'll get to in a minute, be patient. There may be fast tracks, but I don't know them. So the Greek Intercultural Church meets in downtown Athens. We've got people from 10 or 15 different countries, and we're only about 25 people, so I think we're pretty diverse for our numbers. These are our values. Welcome one another, make disciples, and glorify God. I'm trying to keep it simple. And the Lord has been building His church there. I'm going to share with you in just a minute a little bit about our process and some of the challenges, which I hope actually will be encouragement to you. This coming Sunday, we're having our first baptism as well, so I'm excited about that. So definitely the Lord is doing some things there. I want to take a minute and talk about the New Testament strategy for church planting. Teo and I didn't talk this morning about this at all, but he he stole my line that Jesus didn't specifically give us a command to go and plant churches. I was going to share that same thing with you, but I'm actually going to develop it in a different way, so we'll go there. Here is Jesus' instruction. You know, he was on earth for only 3 years out of all eternity, and he had to decide very strategically what he was going to do. Well, 33 years, but he worked for 3 years. Very strategically, how am I going to take the message of the kingdom, and how is it going to reach the world? Like, how is this going to move? And he chose to make disciples and release them. A little early, it feels like, before they really even understood exactly what was happening. And he just says to them, go and make disciples. Like, you're my disciples. I called you, remember? Like, you were walking with me. We did life together for 3 years. And now you go out and make disciples as well. They would have known exactly what that meant. And to them, it wouldn't have meant go start churches. It would have meant go find people. Go find people of peace. Share your life with them. Teach them about who I am. In fact, more specifically, Jesus says, teach them to obey all that I've commanded you. Right? So it's actually a fairly scripted process that he's leaving them with. And we see the church in the first decade of its life there kind of doing that and kind of not. If we think about Paul goes into a city, he travels around. We don't get the impression that he is strategically thinking about planting a church when he enters in. We can look backwards and we can think about Paul as a church planter, but we don't get the impression that he's very intentionally trying to plant churches. He goes in and he asks, what is God doing here? Might be meeting Lydia down, at the river, and it might be meeting his jailer, who says, what must I do to be saved? He has antennas up and he's aware and he's ready to bring those people in. And I believe in churches, of course, and we're here because we want to see churches all over Europe full of people worshiping God and praising his name together in diverse community. But the call is to make disciples. And disciples fill churches. So that's what happens. When Paul leaves and he turns around and he looks backwards, he sees that he has left a church. In almost every city he goes to, he does leave a church. But it's kind of an organic appearance of that church. It's almost overlooked, that process. We can hardly script like, well, how does he plant a church? Well, he really just makes disciples. And when he turns around, there's a church. Now, it's not that simple. But I think we focus on that first level. And we see what God's going to do. And I think that's how God builds his church. We don't see that Paul has a particular target group in mind. He's not a cultural expert. He's brilliant and academically brilliant. That, he focuses on the people. He disciples people. Titus, Timothy, he's always surrounded by these people. And he has these relationships with these guys, and he's investing in them, and then he's sending them out. So he's discipling people who disciple other people. Great example to us of how to make disciples that fill churches. A little bit about then what this looks like in my life. I think one of the most surprising things about my life is that I'm planting a church. I love the church. I am a pastor, and I dream of intercultural churches. I enjoy them, but I never thought that I was going to be a church planter, because to me a church planter was someone who was really culturally competent, who looked like he always knew what was going on socially. He's outgoing. He just has that dynamic persona that pulls people in. He's somehow attractional in himself. And he has a plan, and he has a folder, and he knows what he's doing. And that wasn't me. I'm an introvert. I'm not really outgoing, but I love having coffee with people and talking about the gospel. And I love leading small groups, and I love spending life together with people. And when I realized that maybe that's how we could plant a church. I decided that maybe I could move that direction. Teo, was planting ideas in my head early, and we were like, yes, we would dream of a church like that. Maybe someone will do it. I'll carry the flag for it for a while, and we can laugh about it now. And in the end, it was kind of like, you better do it, Philip, And so that was God's calling on my life, to make disciples and to see an intercultural church started. I want to just share with you a little bit of our process and challenges that we face along the way. And then we'll finish with just a couple lessons that God has taught me. So the first process, the first thing in our timeline, really, and like I said, we've been at this for a few years, was to build a core group. Basically, find people around you who can see this vision with you, who can say, wouldn't it be great to have a church where everyone who walked in would be welcomed? Not just like, we're happy to have you here. If you can learn the rules, you can be a part of our group. But like, we're glad you're here, and we would love to learn from you and with you more about who God is and who we are and how God wants us to live. That might mean we'll sing some songs that we're not all familiar with. We might have some translation or some people with headphones. Like, we're going to embrace all that because we want to be connected. Just like Hans was explaining to us, like it's the vision that God has for his people, right? We want to be God's people authentically. So I started in on that, and the first challenge was immediate, and that is that people couldn't imagine that. Now, here you have things you can show people. In Greece, we don't have any intercultural churches. So this is we're the first ones in. So it's very difficult to explain to someone what it could be like. So I'd share the idea, and someone would say, well, isn't there a church for those people? Like, isn't there an Arabic group over there? Isn't there an African fellowship over there? I think I've heard about that one over there. Couldn't we send them there? I said, no. Listen, we could do it. Imagine it. Just imagine it. I don't know. It sounds chaotic. How could we all be together? We don't all speak the same language. Like, that was a barrier. Outsiders were all in. If you were an outsider in Greece, immigrant, refugee, or outsider for any other social reasons, you know why a church like that is a great idea, and you understand that the gospel should drive us towards that. If you're part of the homogeneous church, and you're part of the majority culture, you're just comfortable enough where you are. That sounds inconvenient. Why would I do something that would take me outside of what's working for me and actually pretty easy? So that's the pitch. That's the heart. And to be honest, that's ongoing for us in Greece. And we decided, well, we're just going to keep because we're going to have to show people. Like, I can't really describe it. I can tell you about it. I can draw circles on napkins and I can explain it to you over coffee. But we're just going to go, and then I'll invite you to come and see it. In some ways, we're in that phase right now. We did get a core group together. We got about 10 or 12 people that were all in, pretty diverse group. We had a couple of Greek people on it, people from all over the world, and we began some language-based Bible studies. So we didn't have an Alpha course. Alpha is not in Greek, and there's some other reasons culturally why we couldn't really jump in on that. So we decided we're going to start in on some small groups. So we have a Farsi group, an English group, and a Greek group. And those groups started meeting together, and the goal was to bring them all together into one worshiping body. Well, small groups evidently are really hard to do, and I knew this already because I've been there for 10 years. Small groups are really difficult to pull together in Greece because of the view of time and because of lack of trained leadership, but mostly time. No church has small groups because you can't get people to commit to come to something every Thursday. They might come one Thursday if you know them well and you invite them. But then if you say, we're doing it again next Thursday, everyone's not sure because no one knows what they're doing next Thursday. Because there might be a strike, the metro might not be working, the center of town might be closed because somebody's in town, you might get invited over to grandma's house. some government office might be closed and you have to go back tomorrow. Like, people don't control their time, so you can't give it away because it's not really yours. And it's socially irresponsible to sign up for something a week ahead, because more than likely you'll have to cancel. And you won't be available when your group of friends says, hey, let's go out tonight for coffee. And you'll have to say, oh, I can't because I do this thing every Thursday. And they'll be like, why are you have something on your schedule? Now we can't go to coffee when we want to, right? So that's our world. We're working through that. I don't have the solution to that yet. That is our challenge for small groups. Be praying for us. Although I will say, just because you can't control your time doesn't mean that life doesn't work for you. Greeks have this like tenacious connection with the people around them and a deep relational strength to their culture, which is ironically important as a part of a church. So I think that there is a way forward. It just isn't as organized as let's meet every week for a long period of time. We did a soft launch then. So we're moving along, and we started meeting for worship once a month. And this was the moment where we take these groups that are meeting together and we just pull them together. It felt like what I was describing with Paul. We thought, oh, this is some kind of a launch. This is really a big event for us as a church. Like, this is our first worship service, and we did it, and it was just a non-event. We looked back on that evening and we thought, wow, it was all the same people we already knew. They were already in our groups. And of course they were going to come because we've all been learning about God together. And it just kind of happened organically. To me, that was a really powerful moment, because I had thought that was going to be the start of something. But really, it was just a continuation of all the things we've been doing since the beginning. The challenge was that once we had started services, we started losing energy. Right? In a place where there's so few Christians, margins are very small for extra energy to do ministry. So, once I started preaching every week in Greek in my second language, and once, we had a worship team that needed to have rehearsals, and, things, you lost a little bit of energy for like the small groups and everything else. So that'll come up in some of the lessons that we've learned. It was definitely a challenge. And we had full launch last summer, where we started meeting every Sunday morning. Really beautiful time. I'm super excited that the Lord led us to do that coming out of the lockdown that we had last spring. And I'm thankful for the chance to see these brothers and sisters in Christ every Sunday worship God, sing songs in different languages. I mean, last night felt really comfortable to us. We have that kind of worship, not that level of musicianship. That was excellent work last night. But hearing people sing in each other's languages is really beautiful and really powerful. And this is our biggest challenge, I think, that we faced in the last 6 months, and that is that about 80% of our leadership team has left. And I think COVID pushed people to leave earlier than they were planning to leave. Some people had thought, I'll be here 5 years, and they left, or I'll be here for a little while longer, and they just left. So now we're rebuilding. Church is still going, but behind the scenes, we're developing leaders, and we're praying for more leaders, and we're investing in that discipleship process. On top of all these challenges on the right column, I'll just add this one, which I think you'll understand pretty well. This was another challenge we faced for launching a church, but this is the antidote, and that is that God was so good to us. I think about Barnabas, who shows up in Antioch when there are reports that people who are not Jews are coming to Christ in those early days, and that they're meeting together, and that there's this intercultural church that's kind of popping up in Antioch, and everybody in Jerusalem is getting really worked up about it. And they're like, Barnabas, go see what's going on. So they send Barnabas, and he shows up, and it says in Acts chapter 11, he was glad when he saw the grace of God. The grace of God working through us is a cause for joy. And that's really our only hope. And that's the power behind what we do. That's the message that we preach. It's God and his work. Let me share some lessons really quickly. Just kind of move some of these. And some of these will be relevant to you depending on where you're at in this process. I'm looking back from my stage where I am, and these are the things that God's shown me. They're not in any order. There's 9 of them. We're just going to kind of move through them. Be prepared for upheaval and setbacks. I took a lot of courage from Teo's initial advice. He said, you cannot control an intercultural church. And that was definitely true, and that's okay, but sometimes that comes out in a positive way, and sometimes it feels negative. But in everything, God's at work. So just be prepared for that, and I think you will. Those expectations will help you in those darker days. Don't be overwhelmed. Just move forward step by step. Focus on disciple making. So if you're imagining this end goal, like, well, how am I going to have a church? Like, where will I put all the people? What will I don't have all the musicians. How do I do all this? Make disciples, and the disciples will help you figure out what you all should do next, and you'll move forward little by little together as a community. This one's kind of related to that. Invest in your leaders first and let your team connect to visitors and seekers. And I say this as someone who's low on extra margins in my schedule because we don't have a lot of leaders, but I think this is appropriate for all of us. You will get overwhelmed as things begin to scale. Like, meeting with 5 people is great. Leading one small group, alpha group, that's great. But it won't take very long before this process will do what it's supposed to do, and other people will come to Christ. You'll have more people than you can shepherd yourself. Invest in your first level of teachers and leaders heavily, and let them do the work of connecting and welcoming. Let them use their homes. I mean, you're doing it too, but you don't have the capacity to go all the way out to those edges. So that's why you're investing in these people, and they'll invest in the next level. So that's the way Jesus did it. That's the way we do it. Jesus has had levels, right? So invest heavily in the people around you. Pray and depend on God to build His church, right? It's His activity. You are not going to have the best idea for how to plant a church. You're not going to have a brilliant idea that's going to make it work in your city, but God does. God knows exactly how He's going to do it. And so we pray and we rest in Him to do His work. Build a team. So this is kind of related to the other ones. You can't carry this on your own. And keep building. Keep investing in those people around you. If some of them leave, that's great. The church in Antioch sent out Saul and Barnabas. They're what a loss for the church, right? You have 5 leaders in Acts 13, and you're supposed to send out Saul and Barnabas to leave. That's how it goes. Just keep building. I'm sure the church in Antioch didn't give up, right? They just kept investing in other people and growing. Invest in people and their movement towards Christ, and the church will come together more easily. I'm just articulating what I've explained already. When you don't overimagine what you have to do to get a church built, invest in people and the church. That's the building of the church. You're building from the ground up, right? Keep the processes simple. Bible studies, services, events. Beware of things that take disproportionate time to their value. So there'll be lots of rabbit trails, we say in English, lots of places you can run where they're just like pits. They'll take your time. We were designing a paper bulletin where we printed everything in lots of languages and introduced all the songs in multiple languages, and we had translation teams. It was too much. We lost, that was all I could ask people in my church to do, was just put the bulletin together. And I thought, you know what, let's scrap the bulletin, we'll just put the stuff up on the screen, and then you guys who are working all that, go make disciples, do the work of the gospel. So you may find things like that. And I think this is the last one, be patient. Don't sprint. Don't push too hard, because you can't afford to burn out, and your team needs you to be healthy. Right? So this is kind of a pastoral concern that I have for everyone who wants to follow after Jesus. Jesus was, he was going to the mountains to rest. This is a slow pace. 3 years. He's got 3 years, and it looks so slow. He's just eating with people. He's doing all this like non-time pressured sort of thing, and that seem to be effective. So don't let yourself be overwhelmed by the pressure to perform or be productive. Take care of yourself. Don't sprint. Life is too long to sprint. Life is long. Go slow and steady and see what God will do. Those are some of the things that God has taught, is teaching us in Southern Europe. I hope they're helpful here. To be honest, I'm learning so much already from you all, just from the level of spirituality in this room and the dependence on God that I see. I'm thankful for that, thankful for each of you. I'm really excited to see what God is going to do, because I sense here that there is an anticipation that God is going to act. There's a faith in this room that's really tangible and powerful. And there's also promises from God that he will build his church. And so I think that we're in a good place to think that we can move forward by just keeping to the things that God's called us to do. Make disciples, see them grow up into healthy churches. Thank you.